It is 1978, somewhere in the American Midwest. A freight train stretches across the flatlands, 100 cars long, loaded with grain, coal, and steel. At the very back, a red car rocks on the rails. A lantern burns in the window. A brakeman watches the track vanish behind him. To anyone watching from the roadside, the caboose looks like the rear guard, the last line of defense on a 10,000-ton machine. The assumption is obvious: remove that crew and catastrophe follows. But every major American railroad removed it anyway, all of them. Within a decade, the caboose was gone. The accident rate did not rise. The real story is about what replaced it and why nobody saw it coming. The caboose had been a fixture of American railroading since the 1860s. Most people today file it away as a kind of rolling rest stop, a place for the crew to sleep, drink coffee, and play cards while the train rolled through the night. That image is not wrong exactly, but it misses what the caboose was actually there to do. It was a mobile command post. It carried the rear brakeman and the conductor, and their job was one of the most demanding roles on the entire train. They watched the cars, all of them, from the back. What they were specifically watching for was something railroaders called a hot box, an overheating axle bearing. In the era before electronic sensors, a bearing could heat up gradually, imperceptibly at first, then rapidly, until it seized, locked, and threw a fully loaded freight car off the tracks at speed. The rear crew was the detection system standing between that failure and a derailment. They also watched for dragging equipment, chains, brake rigging, anything hanging beneath the cars that could catch a rail or dig into a tie. They watched for shifted loads, listing cars, brake failures, sparks. The caboose was not comfort. It was a human sensor array bolted to the back of a machine that weighed more than most buildings and moved faster than most people drove. Here is where the story turns. By the 1960s, freight trains were getting longer, dramatically longer. A train that once topped out at 50 cars was now running 80, 90, 120. More tonnage per run meant better economics, and every railroad in the country was chasing that math hard. And the caboose became a problem. On a long train, the couplers connecting each car are not rigid. There is a small gap in each connection. On a 100-car train, that is 100 small gaps stacked end to end. When the locomotive at the front applied the brakes, the stopping force traveled backward through the train as a wave, each gap absorbing and then releasing the energy. By the time that shockwave reached the rear, it had amplified. The caboose rode the end of the whip, snapping violently with enough force to throw crew members off their feet and into walls. Rear-end injuries were common, and while the brakeman was being thrown around at the back, he had no visibility into the middle of the train, which on a mile long consist is exactly where most mechanical failures were developing. The caboose was watching the wrong section of the train from the most dangerous position on it. The longer the train grew, the worse both problems got. At the same time, a different system was quietly eliminating the caboose's core purpose from the outside. Hotboxes had always been the silent killer of freight rail. A rear crew member might spot the glow of an overheated bearing at night, or catch a faint smell, but the detection window was narrow, seconds, at speed, in darkness, with the train's own noise working against them. Beginning in the late 1960s, railroads started placing wayside hot box detectors alongside the tracks at regular intervals. These were ground-mounted infrared sensors that scanned the axle bearings of every passing car and transmitted temperature readings directly to the locomotive cab. No fatigue, no visibility problem, no narrow window. By the mid-1970s, wayside detectors covered the major freight corridors across the country. When a bearing started to overheat, the engineer received a radio alert before the rear crew could detect anything at all. The caboose was no longer the first warning. It was now the slowest warning in the entire system. In 1982, a small device appeared on the back of a test train in California. It weighed about 30 pounds. It attached to the coupler of the last car with a simple bracket. It had a pressure sensor, a radio transmitter, and a flashing red light. Railroaders called it FRED, Flashing Rear End Device. FRED addressed the one job the caboose was still performing that wayside detectors could not cover. A freight train's braking system runs as a continuous air line from the locomotive through every car to the final coupler. If that line lost pressure anywhere, a cracked hose, a failed fitting, a separation, the brakes behaved unpredictably across the whole train. The rear crew in the caboose monitored that airline from behind. FRED replaced that check with a continuous electronic reading visible in the cab. Brake pipe pressure at the rear of the train, updated constantly, no human interpretation required. The railroad unions were furious. Eliminating the caboose meant eliminating the rear-end crew, tens of thousands of positions across the industry. Regulators were skeptical. The argument from management sounded, on its surface, reckless. Replace trained human observers with a device smaller than a carry-on bag. But the operational data was increasingly impossible to argue with. The wayside detector network was already catching hot box failures faster than any rear crew could. EOT pressure monitoring was more consistent than a fatigued observer at the end of a long overnight run. The caboose crew had become the least reliable component in a system that had been automated around them, piece by piece, for nearly 20 years. In 1982, Southern Pacific petitioned the Interstate Commerce Commission to run mainline freight without cabooses on certain routes. The ICC approved a trial. Southern Pacific ran it. Nothing went wrong. By 1984, the ruling extended to Class 1 railroads across the country. The phase-out moved fast. Union negotiations produced severance packages and early retirements, but the operational decision was made. When the accident data came in, there was no spike in derailments. In hot box detection specifically, performance held or improved because infrared sensors ran continuously and FRED transmitted pressure data in real time, neither of which required a human being to be alert and mobile at the back of a violently rocking car at 3 in the morning. The last caboose to run in mainline service on a major American railroad was not commemorated. There was no crowd, no famous photograph. It was a quiet departure from a yard on an ordinary weekday, and the car attached behind it was just another boxcar. The next time a freight train crosses at a grade crossing, look at the very last car. Not for the red car, it is not there. Look at the final coupler. There is a small device clipped there, a flashing red light, a short antenna, a box about the size of a thick hardcover book. That is not a reflector for road traffic. It is an EOT device, end of train, and it is the direct descendant of FRED. It monitors brake pipe pressure at the rear and transmits it to the cab in real time. Modern EOT units are two-way. In an emergency, the engineer can trigger a brake application simultaneously from both ends of the train. On a mile-long consist, that synchronized stopping force cuts braking distance in a way that a caboose crew, no matter how experienced, could never physically replicate. That blinking light is the device that ended 140 years of railroad tradition, and almost nobody driving past it knows what they are looking at. The caboose did not disappear everywhere or all at once. Short line and regional railroads, many running older equipment without wayside detector coverage, kept them well into the 1990s. Mountain territory sometimes held onto rear-end crews longer, where extreme grades and sharp curves made human observation feel harder to give up. Some cabooses remain in active service today. Hump yards, where cars are sorted by rolling them over a small hill and letting gravity direct them into the right track, still use them in certain operations. A small number of Class 3 railroads never fully transitioned, and EOT devices have failure modes of their own: battery drain, signal loss in remote territory. Coupler disconnects that separate the device from the train entirely. Protocols exist for all of these, but the system is not flawless. A human eye can still catch things a pressure sensor cannot. A fire starting on a flat car, a load beginning to shift. a structural crack that has nothing to do with brake pipe pressure. That tension between electronic coverage and human observation was never cleanly resolved. It was recalculated. The caboose was not cut to save money. That is the comfortable story, the one that fits a simple narrative about corporations eliminating jobs. The real version is harder to argue against. The caboose was made obsolete by the trains it was designed to protect. As freight rail scaled up, longer, heavier, faster, the human observer at the rear became both less effective and more vulnerable to the machine he was supposed to be watching. A 30-pound device replaced him, not because safety stopped mattering, but because the device was doing the job more reliably than he could. That blinking red light on the last coupler of every freight train crossing the American flatlands tonight is the heir to every brakeman who ever leaned from the platform of a red car, watching the track disappear into the dark. Same job, same stakes, no human required, but the industry has not finished answering the question that replaced it. Freight trains are getting longer again. Some unit trains today run over 3 miles from the front locomotive to the final car. The EOT device covers the rear. Wayside detectors cover the axles at fixed points along the route. The middle of a 3-mile train is still largely dark. Railroads have been embedding distributed power units mid-consist, remote-controlled locomotives buried in the center of the train to manage the braking forces that slack action generates across that enormous length. Some engineers in the industry argue those units are quietly becoming the new rear-end problem. A critical system in the center of a machine 3 miles long, managed remotely, with less real-time monitoring than either the front or the back. What is actually happening in the middle of a 3-mile freight train, moving at 60 miles an hour through the dark, is a question nobody has cleanly solved yet.